So if you're going to ask me what some red flags would be to watch for when you're going to buy a property, number one is going to be the neighborhood, because neighborhood's probably going to have one of the largest effects on your equity. If it's a neighborhood that's really up and coming and you know that there's been higher property values seen in the neighborhood fairly recently, people are remodeling, fixing things up, that's a good sign. But if it's a neighborhood that overall is run down and appears that it's going to stay that way, or there's high crime, or you just get that vibe when you're in the neighborhood, that's a red flag. The second thing that I think you should really watch out for is a blank seller's property disclosure. That's a red flag. The seller either wasn't educated enough by their agent on what it was to fill it out correctly and get you the information that you need to make an informed purchase, and or the seller just doesn't pay attention and doesn't care. And then the third thing I would say is if there is a ton of deferred maintenance or disrepair, and specifically things like water damage and baseboard or trim molding or flaking because it's gotten water on it, or drywall where it's been wet, ask about it. If it's not in the seller property disclosure, find out what the details are that caused that to happen so that you know if it's an issue that's been taken care of or if it's a continuing issue. The other side of that is if a house has been fixed and flipped, there can be still underlying issues on a house that's been fixed and flipped. And I would say, in fact, you should even do more careful and closer examination. Green flags for home buying. Number one is the converse of the red flags, neighborhood. You've got to look at the neighborhood. You can't change the location when you buy a property. So you want to make sure it's either a neighborhood that's really well established and property values have held or increased over time, or that it for sure is an up and coming neighborhood. Like people are building, remodeling, revitalizing that neighborhood so that those property values will continue to increase. Two, I think the next most important thing, and maybe some builders will argue with me on this, but I love homes that were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're just good, solid construction. They started to do like a little bigger kitchens, bigger closets. So the homes have good bones. And the last one is something you might not think about, but I think a green flag is only one or two previous owners. So if a home has like a bunch of previous owners, why did all those people not want to stay? Now, if you're in a community where there's a high turnover, then yeah, I mean, you might not need to think about that as much because military community, things like that, people just end up moving a lot. But if you're in like a well-established town where people tend to stick around for a while, look for homes that only have one or two owners. They loved the neighborhood, they liked their neighbors, the home worked for them. I mean, it obviously worked, otherwise they wouldn't have stayed there for 30 years. That's a green flag.